Hi, I'm Bo Schwartzbach. We're here at the house of Louis Breitenbach. He's a former prisoner of war from World War II. We're going to talk to him about his experiences during the war. Mr. Breitenbach has lived in Anderson Township since 1955. He and his wife, Anna Mae, will be married 46 years this June. They have 7 children and 8 grandchildren. 2 of their sons graduated from West Point. One is a colonel in the Pentagon. Where were you on VE Day?
Where was I on VE Day? I was in Barth, Germany, at Stalag Luft 1, which is a prison camp.
What did you feel?
Euphoria. Was happy to be released. We were released by the Russian army, sweeping through northern Germany.
Were you drafted to get in the army?
Yeah, I was drafted in October of 1942.
Where were you stationed?
Well, I started out at Fort Thomas, Kentucky, and then went to Atlantic City for my basics, and from there I went down to Seymour Johnson Airfield in Goldsboro, North Carolina, to be an aircraft mechanic, and then from there I went to Nashville to work in the Vultee aircraft plant, and from there then I went down to Florida for air-to-air gunnery over the Gulf of Mexico. And then after that I went to Salt Lake City for redistribution, and then I was sent to Pio, Texas, where I met my crew, and that's where we were doing air-to-ground gunnery over the desert. And from there I went to Dyersburg, Tennessee, and took flight training as a flight engineer, and then went back to Topeka, Kansas, where we were outfitted for high altitude flying. We got our heat suits, our side arms, the sheepline coat and pants and hat, and then we went across the Atlantic Ocean on the Queen Elizabeth I and landed in Scotland, and from Scotland we went by railroad down to Molesworth Air Base, which was down around Northampton in the lower part of England.
Okay. Who was your commander?
At the time, I did not know who the base commander was, but my squadron commander was Colonel Stevens. He's now living out in California.
What was your mission when you were sent?
Well, I was on my 13th mission, and we were heading for Aschersleben, Germany, for an aircraft factory to bomb that. We got shot up before we got to the target and started dropping behind the formation, and the fighters started attacking us. So the pilot put in a steep dive, and we got in the clouds and headed back to try to get back to England. Is there another question there that I don't want to overlap anything here?
No, that's okay. What plane did you fly in?
No, I was flying the B-17, which I have a model here, and I was a flight engineer and upper chord gunner. And we had twin 50s, and the pilot was here, the co-pilot there. The navigator and the bombardier were down in the bubble. The radio operator was here in his radio room. The waist gunners, there were 2 waist gunners, one on each side. The tail gunner he had twin 50s, and the ball turret gunner, he had twin 50s. There were 13 guns in all, and it's a B-17 G, and it had a wingspan of 110 feet, and the length was 74 feet, and the dorsal fin was 19 feet high. And we carried about 2 tons of bombs in the bomb bay, which opened up here. We flew high because we had superchargers to force air into the engines. So we flew anywhere from 28 to 35,000 feet.
What country were you over when you were shot down?
We were over Holland when we got attacked again by a fighter, and he came up under the airplane, under our airplane, and the tail gun, his guns were out. Mine could not lower, otherwise I would have shot the tail off, and nobody else could fire at him, but he came up and raked all the other engines that we had and had left. The number 4 engine was already out when flak blew a hole in right behind it, so we were lucky that it didn't catch fire. But we were able to lumber along on 3 engines until we were attacked again.
Were you injured when you were shot down?
There were 2 guys that were injured while we were in the air, but nobody was hurt when we crash landed in Wik Bij Duurstede, Holland, which was a little town just about 30 kilometers from Utrecht, which is, you can find on the map. When Wik Bij Duurstede you can't find.
Did you parachute out of the plane?
Only 2 men parachuted out of the airplane, and we were flying about 800 feet off of the ground, and they just barely made it. There was no chance for anybody else to parachute out because we were going down to a crash landing.
How did you get captured?
Well, our instructions were to every man for himself, to split up and go separate ways. And so everybody went in a different direction. One man took a boat and went across the river, which was nearby. He was captured immediately. The rest of us were evaded I myself and the tail gunner, we hooked up later on, and because the other guy was a Mexican and they did not care to transport him in the underground because it was too obvious that he was not a Dutchman. So they hid him out in a house in Roermond, Holland, in a coal pile. They had a little box under a coal pile, and he stayed down in the basement underneath this coal pile. We later were joined at a house that we were staying in and had a little reunion for a day, and then he went back and stayed there. He evaded completely. There were the navigator, the bombardier, the pilot, the ball turret gunner, and the radio operator. They evaded completely and got back to England. The radio operator stayed with the underground or the resistance and fought with them and went out and raided trains and various strongholds of the Germans, just to keep them off guard all the time.
Where did you hide?
Well, I was picked up almost picked up the same day that I got shot down. I was crossing a field, and these two, or a pasture, and I was heading for a dike that was running along the river, and I was trying to get around to town. And as these women, they were riding by on a bicycle, and I ducked down behind a tree that was there in the dike, and I thought I was well hidden, but they turned around and came back and handed me a note and said, if you're an American flyer, stay here until dark and somebody will come out to pick you up. So they took me down a little bit, and I got into a sluice gate that was in the dike, and I hid there until about 8:30 that night, when two men came out with bicycles and picked me up. Now this was in February, and it was February the 22nd of 1944, and believe me, it was cold, and I had fallen already into a creek and was soaking wet, so I was shivering, and I was happy to get picked up by the underground. And I slept in a nice feather bed that night.
How did you get out of camp? Or did you escape, or did they let you out?
Well, we're getting a little ahead of our time here, because I evaded for 4 months in Holland. I was in Utrecht, Eindhoven, Roermond, Maastricht, and then we crossed the border in a truck that had a false front that we got in from the roof. And we met up with two other men, two airmen, and the four of us got in this truck from the roof, and then they screwed the roof down on the top of the truck, and then this guy was a peddler, and he was delivering vegetables from Maastricht into Liège, Belgium, and we crossed the German border, the Belgian the Belgian-Holland border through a German checkpoint there. Now these men marched all around that truck and lifted the canvas in the back and looked in, and the driver, he started passing out vegetables to the Germans and to throw them off guard, but we could see through little cracks in that false compartment what was going on. And believe me, if we had coughed, we'd have been dead.
Did you hide with a family?
Yeah, most of them were families that we stayed with in various houses, although we stayed in factories and churches. And the longest I stayed was out in the country in the priest rectory at a Catholic church and school. And Jim and I were up on the second floor, and the only time we were allowed to show our faces was we'd go out at night for walks around the countryside to keep our muscles from going soft. So we did a lot of walking outside in the evening and in the dark, and we were very fortunate that nobody reported us there, although I strongly suspect that some kids from the school knew that we were up there, and later on we were visited by just a certain few of these kids from the school next door, and the priest was very hospitable, and so it was there that we started carving little B-17s out of wood, which were about that big, and so it was very interesting but boring because we couldn't do anything.
Are you still in contact with the family?
Well, most of the people there have deceased, and in fact one just died this past February. We used to go to his house. We'd go from the priest's house and go through the woods and go to this man and his wife home, and we'd play cards. And he would go out in the field and shoot, well, we call them partridges over here. I don't know what they call them, but it wasn't that. And so we ate pretty good when we went to visit with him, and then we'd wind up playing cards. We played a lot of cards over the 4 months.
What were you thinking about when you were shot down? Did you think you were gonna die? Or?
Well, let's say I prayed a lot. No, we were pretty confident in the pilot, and we did a wheels-up landing in a pasture, and we slid through a bunch of fences, and it got kind of rough, and we bounced up and down for a while, and we just landed. We eventually stopped at the edge of a pond, and about 200 feet from a steel bridge. So it's a good thing that we didn't have a little more momentum.
Did you hide in all different countries that you landed in instead of just the one you landed in?
Oh yeah, well, I evaded in Belgium, but mostly if you look at a map, you'll notice that Holland goes all the way down to the Belgian border, and we were always in Holland until we crossed the border into to Liège, and that's where we were captured.
Okay. Were only Americans at the prisoner of war camp?
No, there were some British and some Dutch, but most of them were in other camps. This new camp that I first went to was all American. But then when the Russians started sweeping through towards Stalag Luft 4, we were evacuated from that camp, and I was sick and had boils all over the back of my neck, and had ulcers, and so I rode out with 1,500 other men on a train, and we went to Barth, Germany, which was Stalag Luft 1, and that was originally set up as a officers' camp, and there were British and Canadians and Americans in that camp.
How were you captured?
Well, you know, when we crossed the border in that truck, we were taken to an apartment in downtown Liège, and we stayed with a family there. There were 3 daughters and the husband and the wife, and so we were up on the 3rd floor. Now there was Colonel Alford, Lieutenant Stiegel, Jim Hensley, and myself. There's just 4 of us, but we stayed there for about a week, and this gentleman, his name was Gaston de la Rez, and he says, come on, get yourself ready, we're going down to the saloon. He said, what? And he said, well, we're going down to the local bar and get yourself a beer. So we went on down, and we walked in there, the 5 of us, and the place was loaded with German soldiers, and he picked out a table, and we all sat down around there, and he got us some beers, and we sat there very uncomfortable amongst those German soldiers, believe me. And we said, Gaston, you're crazy. But everything turned out right. So the invasion happened on June the 6th, of 1944. Well, with that, the underground collapsed. In other words, they ceased to be able to transport prisoner, airmen down the line. So they transported us and moved us up across the marshalling yard and up on a hill into a house. Well, when we walked into that house, there were already 5 American, there were 3 Americans and 2 British soldiers, airmen already there. And these guys were playing baseball out in the yard, and when the wind, it was in June, and the windows were open, they were playing cards and hollering at each other. And no more than the 4 of us walked in there, there was a man there from the underground, and we told him that we wanted to be moved. Well, he says, well, we can't move you because there's no place to take you. So the colonel and the lieutenant, they said they were going to leave, and he drew a gun on them and said, no, you're not. And they said, well, we're out of here. But this was unbeknownst to Jim and I, that they were leaving. So that night they took off, and they were never captured, and went on down and were liberated in France. And it was June the 27th, just about 10 days after the invasion started, that we were looking out the back window, and there was a park down below. It was up on a hill, and we saw all these German trucks, all these machine guns and everything being set up. And then it wasn't too long after that they started sweeping up this street, and you could hear them banging in doors and windows with their rifle butts and going through the houses. And the house that we were in was being run by a little old lady, and her daughter was bringing the food in for us every day. So we all decided to sneak out the back and go into a house down the street. And then we all 7 of us went up stairs and went into a bedroom and just sat there waiting for the Germans to arrive, because they had so surrounded us that there was no way we could escape unless we wanted to be shot. So we heard them smash in the door, in the window, and they went down the basement, and they started through and searching all the front rooms. And finally this one soldier, he was about 17, 18 years old, he came upstairs and very nonchalant, and he opened this door, and all of us were sitting there on the bed. One guy snuck under the bed and tried to get away, but he didn't make it. But this guy, this German soldier, he turned white. All the blood just drained from his face. And it took him several seconds to holler out that we were up here, and then the other soldiers came up. And that's how we were captured. And we were taken down to a local headquarters and waited there for quite a while until a captain came in and started questioning. And nobody else could speak English, so they had to wait for him. So when he found out we were airmen, why, I happened to be in front of him when he says, "British flyers," and he hauled off and just socked me right in the jaw, and I went down. But I got up real quick too. And with that, that's how we were captured. And then the next day they transported us to Brussels for interrogation. And then the interrogation was over. Why, we were sent to Frankfurt, which is the Dulag Luft in Frankfurt, Germany.
which was the main distribution
point for all prisoners. And while going through the streets of Frankfurt, up on the telephone poles, there were about a dozen other airmen that were hanging by their neck from parachutes. So it was not a very encouraging sight for us to see after being captured. From there we went to Camp Wetsworth, given Army uniforms through the Red Cross. The uniforms were American, and that's how we got back in uniform, and then we were transported to Stalag Luft 4. And just after, I got a picture inside there, just after I was there for about 3 or 4 days, they evacuated a camp up in Lathia, Stalag Luft 6, and they marched those guys into our camp, and the commandant who was in charge of this march from the railroad station to the forelager of our camp double-timed all these guys after they had been in ships for 3 days without water and food, and they were in no condition. They were all handcuffed together, and he started double timing them, and anybody that fell down was bayoneted, and the dogs were sicked on them. And one man that came into the camp, he had 75 bayonet wounds all over his body. He was just one mass of blood, and fortunately he lived as far as up to that point until we were evacuated. Like I said before, I was transported by train, and there were 10,000 of us in that camp. There were 4 compounds, and there were about 2,500 in each compound. And I left in January, they left in February, and they marched for 90 days. My tail gunner, Jim Hensley, was on that march, and it was 0 below weather, and so they were really suffering, and there's a lot of guys died, and most of them came out with frostbite, and so they were eventually liberated in Hanover, Germany.
Can you describe what camp looked like?
Well, there was the compound.
We moved inside because it was starting to get dark outside, so we have more light in here.
Well, we'll continue with the interview.
Yep.
What do you want to know next?
Can you describe what the camp looked like?
Well, the first camp I was in was 4 compounds, and it was just in a big block with a road running down the middle. It was divided 2 compounds on each side of the road, and there were there were anywhere from 15 to 20 barracks in each compound. Had a kitchen, and that they gave us meals out of that kitchen. Each compound was surrounded by a little wooden guard rail, and then there was about 20 feet, and then there was a 10, 12 foot high poles with barbed wire, and then there was about 6 or 8 feet that had coiled barbed wire in it, and then there was another outside fence. And if you tried to get out of that, and on each corner of the compound and in between there were guard towers, and there was a man stationed up there with a machine gun. And if you crossed that first little barrier, he started shouting at you, and if you didn't stop, then you were shot at. As to my knowledge, there was only 2 men that were shot and killed in the camp, but there were a lot of them that tried to. They went berserk and got over to the barbed wire fence. That everybody hollered and said, "Don't shoot, don't shoot," and somebody went and got him, and the German guards took him out and put him in jail or sent him to a hospital. So I know the one guy in my barracks, he started heading for the fence, and we were able to get him out, and the guards took him out of the compound, and the jail was just about 50 or 60 feet on the other side of the fence, and we used to wave to him now that he was in the jail. So he obviously recovered. Another man in my barracks, he went a little off of the deep end, and he was polishing the stove with shoe polish every morning, and that's what we had to cook on or heat up any food that we did have. So we had to call the guard for him, and they took him out. So the camp was, we had roll call 3 times a day, and we had to all fall out of the barracks and line up, and we lined up as close as we could to the barracks, and then the German guards would start counting. Well, with that, they'd come up short because the count wasn't right. So the guy in the barracks was stayed behind in the barracks. He'd run out and get in line, and and they'd have to recount again. Then they would come out right. The commandant was an old Prussian from World War I, and he had the high leather boots with a highly tailored blue German uniform with the peak hat, and if it was raining, and that didn't bother us, I mean, we had to be standing out there, rain, snow, or whatever, but when he walked out of the headquarters, they laid down boards so he wouldn't get his boots dirty. And we had to be clean shaven every day. He was a strict military man and did not believe in having people running around without shaving. So it was a military camp. The food came out of the kitchen. For breakfast, we had a bowl of barley cereal. Had a loaf had about a quarter of a piece of brot, which we called sawdust bread, which was made mostly out of wheat chaff, and was if you didn't eat it right away and you tried to save it, it was like eating a brick the next day. So we were always hungry. And then we got coffee, which was burnt barley and chicory. And the only redeeming thing about it was that it was hot. There was not much taste. We got a Red Cross parcel, which was 11 pounds of food, and we had to divide that amongst 4 men. And you believe me, when we split something in 4 sections, it was exact. Because you and we all stood around, all 4 of us, or all 3 of us watched the guy that was doing the cutting. We got graham crackers and jelly and margarine from the Miami Margarine Company here in Cincinnati, believe it or not. We got cigarettes, and in the pack, and the cigarettes were used as a barter. That was our money, and they had a list that went around, 1 cigarette for this and 1 cigarette for that, and I didn't smoke, and I traded off all my cigarettes for powdered milk, and it came in a can about that big, and it's called Clem. You know what Clem is?
No.
It's milk, spelled backwards. So, and we made a lot of things out of we got a D-bar, which was concentrated chocolate, and the graham crackers, and the margarine, and the sugar. We had sugar cubes. It came in a little box which we had to split up also, and but our dessert was something that we made, and we took graham crackers and we crumbled them up and made a real fine thing out, crumbled them up to fine, and then mixed it with margarine, and out of the tins that we got, we had made pie pans. We got nailed, and we punched holes in the bottom of a can, and we used that as a grater, and that we grated up the chocolate, and then we mixed it with the powdered milk and made a batter out of that. The graham crackers we made into a pie crust, and then we mixed the chocolate and the powdered milk and whipped that up, and it was just like a mousse, and had a lot of air in it. And how we the Clem cans had a key with a you unwrap it, you remember, and so we straightened those out, and we made sticks out of a doll stick, and then we used thread and took 4 of those tin strips and made it into a beater, and we go like that and whip up the chocolate. So then we'd have to leave it set until it solidified, and then we had that for dessert, and believe me, that was great. So I want to read you here. Wait a minute. Here's what was in the parcel. 1 can of powdered Clem. That was 1 pound. 1 box of sugar cubes. 1 box of cake. 2 biscuits. 1 can of fruit jam. 1 can of salmon served with them from the mess with potatoes. Now the Germans took the salmon out. You couldn't save it anyway because you would wind up with salmonella. 1 can of coffee, which was instant postum, and we used that with, we did get hot water. 1 box of prunes or raisins, and I'll tell you about the raisins a little later. We got 1 can of margarine from the Miami Margarine Company of Cincinnati. We got 2 bars of chocolate, which were concentrated D bars. 1 can of Spam, which was held out for the kitchen. We didn't get that. 1 can of corned beef, not kosher, and that was kept out in the kitchen also because you couldn't. We had no refrigerators in that camp. 1 box of cheese, sometimes a little moldy. 5 packs of cigarettes. 1 bar of facial soap. And sometimes there were other items or substitutes like 1 can of pate, which was chicken liver paste. Well, that was given to us, and we used that on our bread. And occasionally we got a can of peanut butter and 1 can of steak or meat and vegetables, which is stew to you. So that was what was in the Red Cross parcel, but you had to split that in 4 equal portions. So you know, I didn't smoke, so I used a lot of my cigarettes for barter. At 3:30 in the afternoon, we were given a pitcher of coffee or hot water. I guess this originated with the English fighters that were in the camp, so they could have their tea time. They always had their tea. Dinner was served at 6:30. I think the word slopped would be more appropriate. Anyway, there were potatoes and carrots, and then there were spuds and carrots, cabbage, carrots and potatoes, corned beef, carrots, potatoes, and turnips. We also had in place of the turnips, we had kohlrabies. Kohlrabies are a form of turnip, but the way they were so old and they were woody inside. I mean, they weren't the freshest things in the world. And if you were chewing on them, well, you had to watch your teeth. So that was,
Your plane had to get shut down. Now why was yours shut down that day?
well, we were not the only airplane shot down. We lost 60 bombers that day that we were shot down. There were 10 men on an airplane. So just figure out there were 600 men that were shot down, killed, parachuted out. But on that particular day, we were playing Tail End Charlie, which is the last plane in that particular group. The airplanes are stacked in formation. There's the lead plane, and then a plane behind it, and the plane over here, and then it goes down for about 18 planes, and then another group, same formation under that, which was called the middle group, and then the low group underneath that. There were 3 echelons flying, and we were the last plane in that formation because we were supposed to go over the target. We were supposed to drop these leaflets. Well, we never made it. So that's one of the reasons that hindered us in bailing out, because it was in a wooden box in the bomb bay, and it took up the whole bomb bay, and so we could not bail out. It was wasn't a permanent fixture in there, but it was installed at the base so there was no way that we could have jumped out the Balm Bay, which was another escape hatch. But like I was saying, we were tail end Charlie, and they picked on the last guy because he's the most vulnerable. Although we were not shot down by a fighter at that point, but we were hit by flak, which just we kept dropping back and could not keep up with the formation.
What did these leaflets say?
They were in German. And I tried to get them translated, but my son Dan, he says, "Forget it, Dad." But I have a picture of him in my book here that I wrote about my experiences, and so I don't know exactly. There it is, right there. Now, if you can read that, why, you're a good man. But there were two sides to it. I only got the one side. But it was not unusual for that type of thing going on. Now, another thing that I could bring out is that the aluminum foil, what we called shaft, we dropped that. The waist gunners would drop this out of the waist gun windows, and what it was aluminum strips about that long, and they'd throw it out the back end of the plane, and it would follow up the radar of the German gunners down below that were shooting up at us. And as it floated down, it became a false image on their radar. So they were going by radar to get the height of the bombers and how high they were flying. And one incident came to mind that we were flying along one day and going into a target, and this P-51 came up alongside of us. It was all painted. He came in straight at us, and then he turned and flew alongside of us, maybe about 1,000 feet out, and it was all painted black. And what it was a captured P-51 that the Germans had probably landed at one of their airfields, ran out of gas, and so they would come up that guy would report the height of our bombers, because when we were dropping the shaft, it was given a false reading. So he would radio down to the ground units, and they would set their fuses on the shells to explode at that height then. So, but that's how we got shot down and then had a crash land in Holland. Is there anything else that you?
No, not about the shutdown. But at the camp, what did you do to occupy your time?
Well, we did a lot of wood carving. I was able to keep my knife, and the tail gunner, who was in another room, he was a good wood carver. And we carved various things, and mostly we were making stuff that we could cook with. But we did have baseballs, and occasionally we got a football that come in through the YMCA, and also the Swiss would send in the Red Cross supplies, and so that's how I got those books that you saw there, and we had pencils and that we could use. and I started taking German lessons, and I did a lot of drawing because I had 2 years of commercial art before I went into the service. Well, I went into the service because I was a printer, and I figured that would help me in my career. So I was fairly proficient at it, but like everything else, you get away from it. And I did a lot. A lot of guys were writing poetry, and I did a lot of copying of their poetry. You want get that book off of the table. Now this, see on the back of this? Those are cigarette packs. Paper from around the cigarette pack. There you got the Camel. There you got Old Gold. More Camel. Oh, you want to
See it.
Yeah. We had a lot of Camels. There's Chesterfield. And there's Old Gold. Someplace in here there's 20 grand and Dominoes, and there's 20 grand. That was a cigarette. These are the cigarettes that we got in the Red Cross parcel. So we had no paper up until I got those books from the YMCA, and so this is what we wrote on. And all this stuff in here is poetry. There's the Domino cigarettes. And there's Raleigh. It's another one. So, and this is what, see this? That's from the Clem King. That's the metal strip, and guys made cigarette pack out of those. They weaved them, and we made all kinds of stuff out of the cans. And New Year's Eve, when I'm talking about prunes and raisins before, well, we took the Clem cans and we took these raisins. We all pulled our raisins and we put them in this can and put a little water in them, and then stuck it on way back in the corner under the bunk. And we had some raisin wine to celebrate the New Year's Eve. And now there were, like I was saying before, there were 20 to 24 men in a room. On one side of the room, there were 3 bunks, 2 deep. In order to get out, you had to crawl over another guy. And on the other side of the room, there was just 1 bunk deep, and it was 3 high. And there was 3. The total size of the room, there was 3 bunks, or 3 beds in a row there. So there was, and then when we got overcrowded, there was men sleeping on the floor or sleeping on our table. We had 1 kitchen table, and there was 1 or 2 stools that we could sit on, but and we had a stove that we heated up some of our food, and in the winter we were allowed to have 12 lumps of ersatz coal. When I say ersatz coal, all it was coal dust. Actually, I guess you would call them briquettes today, about the same thing. They were mixed with some kind of petroleum to keep them together. But that was it. 12 lumps a day, and we had to do our cooking and try to keep warm with that. And the weather was 15, 20 below zero at times with 3 feet of snow. And we had to get out there and get in formation. But most of the time in the winter, you spent your time in bed and covered up as much as possible. Now, I got down to 110 pounds when I was liberated by the Russians in North Germany. We lived on, for 6 weeks we had nothing but cabbage, raw cabbage to eat. I don't eat much cabbage today. So, is there anything else that you would?
What was a typical day there? What would you do every day? Were you trained for this?
We, back at our base, yes. We would go out on the tarmac or whatever you wanted to call it, the aprons, and we would go to our B-17, and we would have to practice jumping out of the airplane through the escape route or escape hatches that we were assigned. The bombardier, navigator, pilot, and the co-pilot were to go out the front hatch, and that's how we went in. We would put our hands out there and pull our feet up into the hatch first, and then pull ourselves up into the fuselage. We were young then. And the radio operator, the 2 waist gunners, and the ball turret gunner would go in a door in the back that opened up. And the tail gunner, he went in another little door that was right near his position in the tail end. And that's where he was to bail out. And we practiced numerous times to go through that routine, that if something did happen, that's what we were taught to do. And it's the same way with ditching. Now, if you had to ditch your plane over the channel or in the North Sea, there were certain assignments that you had to go. You could go out through the pilot's window, because or through the out to the top from the radio room. And the B-17 would stay floating anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes before it would fill up and go down. So that gave you plenty of time, unless you were injured, to get out. If you bailed out by parachute over the North Sea, it was 30 degrees, and unless you were rescued almost within the half hour, you would get hypothermia and just go down and drown. So it was very precarious if you were bailing out over water. And so we were fortunate that we were able to crash land in a flat area. In 1977, wife Anna Mae and son Dan, who was stationed in Nuremberg, went up to Holland and tried to find a place where we crash landed. Well, we drove out there, and something wrong here. I says, we did not have enough room to land an airplane here. But what had happened in the 30 years they had moved the river and built a lock and a canal through there. So that took up where all the land that we had used up to crash land in.
How did you get out of the camp and back to the States?
Well, in April 30th of 1945, when the Russians, we could hear the Russians coming towards our camp. There was a lot of artillery fire, and we knew that something was going to happen very shortly. But at midnight on April 30th, all the Germans left the camp. They just split. And so it was, we were very happy about that, because we knew that we were going to be liberated very soon. And then when the Russians did come, they had tanks, and they were Mongolian Russians, and they wanted to take their tanks and run all the barracks down. And we convinced them that that was not the thing to do. They wanted to run the fences down and what have you. But before they would leave us out of the camp, they asked us why we weren't wearing black armbands. And we said, what? And they said, your president died, and you should be in mourning, and you should be wearing black armbands for 30 days. So, boy, we had to scrounge around finding something black to wear around our arm before they were satisfied. But it was a good week, 10 days before we were able to get out of that camp. In the meantime, we sent out officers, not me, but the senior officers sent out officers to see where the American lines were, and to find out what was to be done. So they eventually got back and told us to stay where we were, and there was an airfield within 4 or 5 miles of our camp, and that they would fly B-17s in to take us all out. And but in the meantime, we started roaming the countryside. A lot of guys went into Barth, Germany, got into a print shop, and printed a little newsletter saying we were liberated, and telling all about the town of Barth, which was a resort area for the Germans. And there was a flak school nearby where they were teaching soldiers how to take care of the flak guns that were shooting us down. Well, we went over there, and that's where I liberated that emblem with the Nazi eagle and the swastika on it. I had a whole bunch of them. I still got them upstairs, and then a lot of other knickknacks that I picked up, and so I was able to bring them back. And then eventually we were flown out. We were taken to the airfield, and before we could even get on the airplane, they dusted us down with insecticide, because we were full of lice. And if you ever had lice, you'll know what I mean. Those things were perfect during the daytime, but boy, at night they would start crawling, and they would start sucking on your blood. And the only way you could find them was after they had sucked on your blood. You'd go and pick them out of your underwear and your blankets and your clothes, because you could see the blood. But other than that, they were most of the time they were invisible to you. I remember one day when I got my blanket out and hung it over a line that was in the camp there, and I picked out 38 lice and squashed them. So before we got on the airplane, they just dusted us from head to foot with yellow insecticide. And we looked like a bunch of Chinese getting on an airplane. But inside of an hour, we landed in an airport near Camp Lucky Strike in France, and I was there for 2 weeks before I was shipped out, and I came back on an Army troop ship. Took us 2 weeks to cross the Atlantic, but while I was at the camp, a lot of guys went into Paris, and I was not interested in Paris. I stayed there, and right near the mess hall, and I went from 110 pounds to 165 pounds in 2 weeks. So you know I ate. I had to get another uniform. But it was cold there. It was cold in France in June. So got back to the States, landed at Newport News, got my orders, and I was ordered to home for a 30-day R&R. And then, after I was home for a while, then I got another order to go to Miami Beach and for another R&R and for a physical checkup and everything, dental, and to see if you're physical, things like that. And I spent a lot of time in the bars down there. So, and then when I got back home, wasn't long, and I had a sort of a nervous breakdown, or sort of a, it was a reaction to all the stress and everything. And I was in Wright-Patterson Airfield Hospital for a month or better, and then from there I was sent out and went to Camp Atterbury, where I got my discharge. And that's just about it.
Right, it's been 50 years since VE Day. Russia's no longer communist, Germany's reunited. There's been war in Bosnia for a number of years, which is the same trouble spot that sparked the first two world wars. Do you think there'll be a World War III?
I don't think there'll be a World War III, no. Not in the I don't know, the expanse that World War II covered, but I think we're going to have hot spots all over the world, off and on. Russia and Chechnya, Somalia, Haiti, places in Africa, Rwanda, all those places, they're just slaughtering people left and right. And but I don't think that it'll ever be another world conflict per se, because Russia is on an even plateau now. They don't know which way they're going to go. But Oklahoma City brought it home. So you never know what's going to happen next. So, all we can do is hope and pray and try to do the best we can.
Based on your experiences, what would you like to tell the future generations?
Stay alert. And don't believe some of the stuff that's going on today. The politicians are trying to straighten things out, but they're running into roadblocks along the way. And I would say to stay morally alert and don't get sucked into drugs and whatever that is going to come. You're the next generation. You're the one that's going to have to carry on. I'm 74 years old, and I'm sure that I don't have many more years to carry on, but it's up to you people, to keep on a moral plane and try to straighten the country out and the world to make sure that things don't get out of hand. Good?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for letting me interview you.
Well, thank you for putting up with me.